Initially, I went to a comic convention in Chicago, Wizard World comic convention. I took a portfolio of pencil and ink, page work, pinups, covers, that kind of stuff. And I just started dropping by publishers' tables and asking if there was an editor available. And I went by Tim Vigil's table. I'd always been a big Tim Vigil fan, and I showed him some stuff. He loved it. And at the time, he was working on some Broken Halos book with Broken Halos Publishing. And he liked my stuff enough that he called the publisher over, and he said, "Hey man, I like this guy's stuff, give him some work." And I inked Broken Halos issue number 5 over Tim Vigil's pencils. And then I stopped at a table for a small sub-indie company called Dead Dog Comics out of Minnesota. Showed some samples, and their inker and editor liked my stuff and took some Xeroxes. And he said, "I'll talk to the publisher. If we're interested, we'll get in touch with you." So I got back to Kentucky after the show, started working on the Tim Vigil inks. About a week later, I get a call from Chaz DeMoss from Dead Dog Comics. And he tells me that they've recently decided to do a Night of Living Dead comic book. And they love my pencils, and they want me to draw this thing. So we negotiated page rate and whatnot. And, I think a couple weeks later, I flew to Philadelphia at those guys' first show. And I was off and running. I was penciling the Night of Living Dead book, inking the Tim Vigil book. And then when I got the first script for the Night of Living Dead book, I read it through, and I hated it. So I think you can do better. Won't you just write it? And so I said, okay. And within 2 days, I sent him a finished script for issue number 1. Yeah, well, when I started penciling, it was kind of spooky because I'd never penciled a comic book before. I'd done sample pages and stuff, and pitched some stuff to some local guys. We did a couple of ash cans with some guys. But to actually be on deadline for the first time and actually have to produce, and I'd heard this process J. Scott Campbell used. That he drew everything really small, and then for speed for his layouts, thumbnails, and then he'd blow the thumbnails up and just trace them out for finished pencils and tighten things up. So I was so spooked about meeting these deadlines, I decided I was going to do the J. Scott Campbell route. Well, I sucked at it. So if you look at those early Barbara Zombie Chronicles books that I did, the artwork is not very good. It's out of proportion. Things are weird because I was trying to do stuff small and blow it up and then trace it out. And it became more of a workman-like process instead of sitting down with a board and just drawing. So by the time I finished that book up, I was getting some harsh criticism from people. So the next thing I did for Dead Dog was a book called Curse of the Blood Clan. And I started turning out pencils, just raw art, just sitting down with a blank piece of paper and starting to lay the panels out and drawing right on the board. And I remember my pencils were so tight on that book that they decided not to use an inker. They said, "We're just going to darken these in Photoshop. We don't need an inker." And when that book came out, a lot of the criticisms for fans were like, "Oh my God, this is the same guy who did the Night of the Living Dead stuff. We can't believe it." It's like a complete turn, complete change. And that's because I was drawing organically, putting the lines on the paper instead of that J. Scott Campbell process. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do. And that's when I first talked to Dead Dog Comics, the samples they gave me, they were doing kind of like some some kind of dark superhero stuff. A little horror oriented, but not straight horror. It was more poppy, hero oriented stuff. So basically, when they contacted me after seeing what was in my portfolio, I guess they thought, "Hey, lends itself to a horror book, and we're going to do this Night of the Living Dead thing." So it was a good fit. So now, if they'd have called me and offered me a superhero gig, I don't know that I would have taken it.
Yeah.
But because it was horror and Night of the Living Dead zombies, which I was a big fan of, I said yeah. Probably my biggest influences were like the 1970s horror comics. At the time, I hadn't been exposed to the old EC titles and things like that. I was just pretty much what I could find on the spinner rack. And those things like House of Mystery and House of Secrets, Ghost, the DC titles, they did a lot of that stuff. Marvel did some horror stuff too, but their stuff was always more, again, superhero oriented. It was more kaiju, Jack Kirby, giant monster thing. DC was doing a lot of real noir, black and white oriented stuff with color in it, but it still had goopy inks and stuff. So I always gravitated toward Bernie Wrightson's cover work. And back at that time, I'm a young kid, 5, 6 years old, and going to the drugstore buying comics. So I didn't know Bernie's name per se, but I knew his style.
Yeah.
And I knew enough to pick his books off the rack. If he did a cover, or if I flipped through and I saw a Bernie Wrightson short story or something, that's the book that I bought. And then other than that, I bought a lot of war comics, Joe Kubert, Sergeant Rock, G.I. Combat, A lot of westerns, Two Gun Kid, Rawhide Kid. Unfortunately for my comic collection, I bought everything but superhero stuff.
Yeah.
I just wasn't that big a fan of the bright colors and stuff. I liked what I liked when I watched TV. I like to watch westerns and horror movies on TV, so I gravitated to that type of comic. Well, 68 was kind of born during that Barbara Zombie Chronicles phase working for Dead Dog Comics, because I remember we were at a comic convention in Toronto, Canada, and Chaz DeMoss from Dead Dog and I were standing out on the street in Toronto after the show, and we were just kind of rapping about comic books. And he was discussing the next story arc, 3-issue story arc in the Barbara series. And he said, you know, it takes us so long to produce these series that I'm afraid fans are going to lose interest between these arcs. He said, what I'd like to do is a one-shot that bridges our release of these 3-issue story arcs. And he said, you got any ideas? And I said, yeah, actually, I've been thinking of this idea. I said, I don't think this has ever been done. I said, what if Barbara from Night of the Living Dead, who's an attractive girl in the movie, I mean, they never mentioned a boyfriend, a love interest, a husband. I said, what if the reason behind that is because her boyfriend has been drafted and is in Vietnam? I said, I'd like to do a one-shot centering around Barbara's boyfriend, and he's a lieutenant in Vietnam. And I came up with this whole storyline about a 5-man deep recon team going into the jungle to find out why a listening post has gone silent. There's no word for it. And the leader of that recon team is Barbara's boyfriend. And when I pitched that to Chaz on the streets of Toronto, he loved it. And he greenlit it right there. So when I got home from that trip, I wrote the initial script for 68. And when I sent in the script, they loved the script. And he wanted me to draw it. But I said, no, man, I'm done drawing zombie comics. I don't want to do it. I said, I'll write them, but I don't want to draw them. He said, what do you want to draw? I said, I want to draw werewolves. And that's how Curse of Blood Clan was born. Jay Photos contacted me and he said, hey, I've got this thing I'm going to do with the Frazettas. And he said, I know you're a big Frazetta fan and everything else. He said, how would you feel about writing scripts based on Frank Frazetta's famous paintings? And of course, you know, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, just tell me when and where.
Right.
So he told me they were doing Death Dealer, and they'd already started on issue 1. They had some preliminary drawings and stuff like that. And he said the next thing we want to do is probably a horror piece. He said, so I want you to look online through some of Frank's paintings, pick a horror piece, you know, and do a horror book, because I'm kind of the horror guy. So while they're doing Death Dealer, I'm just looking around at Frazetta paintings and stuff. And I just kept coming back to Dark Kingdom, because I think it's probably my all-time favorite Frazetta painting. And I looked at that piece and I'm like, what is wrong with that guy? What is he staring at? He's a muscular badass with a winged helmet. He's got an axe, but he looks like he doesn't want to take the next step into that cave. There's something in there that, you know, he just doesn't want to move forward. So finally I went back to Jay, and when I emailed him, I didn't just email him the Dark Kingdom painting that I wanted to do. I emailed him the finished script. I'd already written this 24-page script for Dark Kingdom. And he got back to me and he said, well, man, you know, we were kind of saving Dark Kingdom to do as another mini-series after Death Dealer and stuff. I said, just read the script. Let me know what you think. So he read the script and really liked it. He got in touch with me and he said, yeah, we like this. And then the script went to Frank Frazetta, because Frazetta approved everything we did. We sent everything through him. We made any changes or edits that he wanted, but we didn't get any changes or edits on Dark Kingdom. It just came back and it was just green light. And so then Jay and I discussed who should draw it, and we came up with Tim Vigil, because we've both just been a big Vigil fan, and we really wanted to see Vigil do some mainstream stuff. And you know, he's very oriented toward the Conan, pulp, Robert E. Howard stuff. It's just his style lends itself toward that kind of work. And so we sent it to Tim, and Tim and I met in Chicago one year at Wizard World again in the bar, and we discussed the script and just worked out you know, what we wanted to look like. And then, you know, Tim started the artwork, and we were rolling. So my involvement, again, with Frazetta Comics, mostly through Jay Photos, because he orchestrated that whole contract with Ellie Frazetta. And they pretty much worked on a project-by-project basis. So I pitched this to Scott Lacina, and he said, well, we're really not doing creator-owned stuff. I said, well, I know that. I said, but I kind of just want to get your feedback. I've written this first issue script and a synopsis. I'd like to send it to him. Just get, you know, I respect your opinion. So I sent it off to him, and I didn't hear anything from him. Well, then a week later, I get this phone call, and he says, man, you're not going to believe this, but Ray Garton sold the rights to Live Girls along with movie rights, and we can't do Live Girls. That contract just fell through. I'm like, shit, what are we going to do? He said, we're doing Bump. I said, wait a minute, you're not doing creator-owned stuff. He said, dude, he said, that is the single best piece of horror work, novel, comic strip, movie, he said, I've been exposed to in the last 10 years. He said, there's no way that Bump is not going to be Fangoria's flagship title. And I said, dude, it's a little over the top. It's a little hardcore. And he said, that's exactly what I like about it. And so we were off and running doing Bump. I started on the covers, and he said, send me the other scripts. I said, dude, you've got the only script. He said, what about issue 2, 3, and 4? I said, they haven't been written yet. He said, start writing. So within 2 weeks, I had 2, 3, and 4 done. The story was already in my head. I just hadn't sat down to bang it out. So one day out of the blue, he called me, and I think the first movie I worked with him on was The Woman by Jack Ketchum and Lucky McKee. There was a character in the movie, it was a little girl who was born with some special disease where her eyes are grown over. It's like she really doesn't have eyes. The sockets are grown over with flesh and everything. And her parents, when they see this, the way the baby is, they're ashamed of her, and they lock her in the barn and keep her in a dog house, in like a pen, a dog pen. And they called her the dog girl. She's part of the script. So they wanted me to design the facial aspect of the dog girl. And then they did John Dies at the End.
Really?
Yeah. Directed by Don Coscarelli, Phantasm fame. One of my all-time favorite movie series and directors. And he was doing that adaptation, and they needed this creature designed called the Meat Man. And Bob described it to me as, he said, like, there's a scene where a freezer falls open down on the floor, and all this meat comes out, right? And gets possessed by like this dark spirit or witchcraft or something, and it all stands up and recombines in like a humanoid figure. It's got like a butterball turkey for a head, and through the opening's a cow tongue, and its fingers are sausages. He said, that kind of thing. So I did a pretty detailed full figure drawing, and they loved it. In fact, you can watch the DVD now, and on the extras, you see them with my drawing up, and they're sculpting the thing based on my drawing and based on Bob's description. So we worked on that together, and then later on, he called me and he's like, hey man, I need a suit design. And he says, weirdest damn thing. He says, like a walrus suit, okay? Like a full human body-size walrus suit. He said, as if it was made by Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Okay.
I'm like, what? he said, yeah, he said, and then this guy, they cut this guy's legs off, and they take his shin bones, and they sand them down into tusk, and they bolt them to his upper lip, under the lip, into the gum, and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Are you drunk? He said, no, let me send you the script. He said, it's Kevin Smith. And I said, okay, I'm rolling with the vibe now. I say, it's over the top, it's Kevin Smith. I said, I don't know. I said, that sounds a little hokey, man. I said, send me the script and I'll read it and see what I think. Well, he sends me Kevin's script. And I read it, and I loved the script. The script was super intelligent, well written, well researched. He had these flashbacks with Hemingway and World War II. And, the premise is still out there, but it was really well handled, and I thought well constructed. So I called him back and said, yeah, I'll do this, man. This sounds fun. So we did a couple rough sketches and stuff, and they'd say, well, make it bulkier, make it bigger, blah, 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 blah. And he tells me, the guy's arms are sewn to his body, so he can't move his hand. And I'm like, well, how? Because it's supposed to fight, right? It's supposed to get in his walrus suit and fight another guy in a walrus suit. And I'm like, if he can't move his arm, how the hell are these guys going to fight? And Bob's like, well, we're working that out. We're choreographing it back. He said, don't worry about it, just do this suit. So I got the drawings to where Kevin approved them, because he was sending my scans off to Kevin. Kevin would say, tweak this, change that, more of this, more of that, less of that, whatever. And part of it was adding like ears and nipples and stuff to the suit, because it's supposed to be shredded parts of people's epidermis, and it's going to have whatever. And so I'm adding, okay, nipple obviously would go there. If I was making a human flesh walrus suit, I'd have the nipple there. And so finally we got to where they liked everything about it. So then I find out, I don't know, a year later, that Tusk is going to get a theatrical release. And I'm like, no, there is no way that this movie about guys in human flesh walrus suits is going to be on the big screen. You're punking me. He said, no, man, we're going to get a limited theatrical. So it actually made it to Lexington, Kentucky, where I went to a cinema, and I sat down with some buddies, and we watched this movie. And they're just, every time that suit appears on screen, they're like turning around looking back at me and just like, what the hell's wrong with you, man? And I'm like, dude, it's credited paying film work. I don't care. What the hell they asked me to do? So I designed this thing. Then he tells me, okay, now we got these 2-foot tall bratwursts that have been infused with Hitler's DNA, and they've got Hitler's face. I'm like, just write it down. And I said, when you verbalize it, I tend to not believe it. I believe you're in a phone booth by the interstate and somebody's got a gun to your head. Tell Kidwell the bratwurst story. So I said, write it down and email it to me so I know you're okay.
Tell Kidwell the bratwurst story.
So I designed this thing. It's got a hockey mask, and these bratwurst, the hockey mask opens up like a door so the bratwurst can climb down in there, and the golem's like this machine that they can, control. Mm-hmm. So I designed that. And then I got a couple other projects I've worked on, for Kevin that haven't come out yet, haven't been filmed yet and stuff like that. So I don't even know how much I can talk about.
Right, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's
cool.
Cool.
Like Moose Jaws. He's talked about Moose Jaws on his podcast, which is the way he describes it, Jaws with a moose. There you go, Moose Jaws. So I've done some roughs on that. We don't have any final designs or anything, but I've been involved in that and a couple other projects for him. So we structured a short in, I think, first issue of the regular run of 68, and it's called Sissy. And actually, maybe an issue 2, I can't remember. But it's about a guy who falls in love with one of these girls that he picks from the other side of the fence. And so when she dies and comes back as a zombie, he's safe behind the fence, but he wants nothing more than to be with this woman. And just because she's a zombie, he doesn't care. And he ends up killing the guard and opening the gate and letting these zombies in, and he embraces Sissy at the end, and he says, "Let me give you the world," and she's by his foot. Yeah. So we based that strictly on that idea that Nat Jones he researched it somewhere on the internet and found it, and it was so perfect that we incorporated it into a short that had a lot of impact for. I think it's like a 3-pager. Tim Vigil did the artwork for it.
I've got. I think I only have that one variant that I got from you. That's issue 1.
Yeah, the first one.
Traded the Fear and Loathing in Sesame Street T-shirt for that.
my wife always gets all the booty from these trades.
I think but I remember it was like the first time I met you, and you were like, "Okay, this is a variant, so I'm gonna need more T-shirts." It was something like that, and I was like, "Hey, no problem, man." It was. I remember you being very emphatic about this is a variant cover, so this is rare, and I was like, "Well, that's what I want to trade for."
The variant.
I know. I know. Crazy. It's.
What do you think we do variants? We'd be naked if it wasn't for variants.
I thought, and I thought the whole variant thing went out the window in the 90s when it almost killed comics, but I guess it's...
We're still trying to kill comics, man.